Battle of Thermopylae, 480 BCE, battle in central Greece at the mountain pass of Thermopylae during the Persian Wars. The Greek forces, mostly Spartan, were led by Leonidas. After 3 days of holding their own against the Persian king Xerxes I and his vast southward advancing army, the Greeks were betrayed, and the Persians were able to outflank them. Sending the main army in retreat, Leonidas and a small contingent remained behind to resist the advance and were defeated. The Battle of Thermopylae's political origins can be traced back to Xerxes' predecessor, Darius III the Great, who sent heralds to Greek cities in 491 BCE in the hopes of persuading them to accept Persian authority. This offended the proud Greeks greatly. The Athenians went so far as to toss the Persian heralds into a pit, while the Spartans followed suit and tossed them into a well. In 480 BCE, Xerxes invaded Greece. As a continuation of Darius's original plan, he began the same way his predecessor had. He sent heralds to Greek cities, but he skipped over Athens and Sparta because of their previous responses. Many Greek city-states either joined Xerxes or remained neutral, while Athens and Sparta led the resistance with a number of other city-states behind them. Before invading, Xerxes implored the Spartan king Leonidas to surrender his arms. Leonidas famously replied, "Come and take them." Molon Labe. Xerxes intended to do just that and thus moved toward Thermopylae. Xerxes led a vast army overland from the Dardanelles, accompanied by a substantial fleet moving along the coast. His forces quickly seized northern Greece and began moving south. The Greek resistance tried to halt Persian progress on land at the narrow pass of Thermopylae and at sea nearby in the Straits of Artemisium. The Greek army was led by Leonidas, who was estimated to have had around 7,000 men. Xerxes, on the other hand, had anywhere from 70,000 to 300,000. Despite the disparity in numbers, the Greeks were able to maintain their position. Their strategy involved holding a line only a few dozen yards long between a steep hillside and the sea. This constricted the battlefield and prevented the Persians from utilizing their vast numbers. For 2 days, the Greeks defended against Persian attacks and suffered light losses as they imposed heavy casualties on the Persian army. Only when the Greeks were betrayed did the battle take a detrimental turn for them. Ephialtes, a Greek citizen desiring reward, informed Xerxes of a path that went around Thermopylae, thus rendering the Greeks' line useless and preventing forward advancement of the Persian army. Xerxes took advantage of this betrayal and sent part of his army along this path, led by Ephialtes himself. After reaching the other side, the Persians attacked and destroyed a portion of the Greek army. This forced Leonidas to call a war council, at which it was decided that retreating was the best option. However, as the majority of the Greek army retreated, Leonidas, his 300 bodyguards, some helots, people enslaved by the Spartans, and 1,100 Boeotians remained behind, supposedly because retreating would defy Spartan law and custom. They held their ground against the Persians, but were quickly defeated by the vast enemy army, and many, if not all, sources differ, were killed, including Leonidas. News of this defeat reached the troops at Artemisium, and Greek forces there retreated as well. The Persian victory at Thermopylae allowed for Xerxes' passage into southern Greece, which expanded the Persian Empire even further. Today, the Battle of Thermopylae is celebrated as an example of heroic persistence against seemingly impossible odds. Soon after the battle, the Greeks built a stone lion in honor of those who had died, and specifically for the fallen king, Leonidas. In 1955, a statue of Leonidas was erected by King Paul of Greece in commemoration of his and his troops' bravery. The Battle of Thermopylae also served as the inspiration for the film 300, 2006. Persia, historic region of southwestern Asia associated with the area that is now modern Iran. The term Persia was used for centuries and originated from a region of southern Iran, formerly known as Persis, alternatively as Pars or Parsa, modern Fars. The use of the name was gradually extended by the ancient Greeks and other peoples to apply to the whole Iranian plateau. The people of that region have traditionally called their country Iran, land of the Aryans. That name was officially adopted in 1935. For the history of the region prior to the 7th century CE, see Iran, ancient. For the history of succeeding periods and a study of the current geography, see Iran. For a discussion of the religions of ancient Iran, see Iranian religion. For a discussion of visual arts from the prehistoric period through the Sasanian period, See Art and Architecture. Iranian. For a detailed account of Mesopotamian history through the Sasanian period, see Mesopotamia. History of Leonidas. Died 480 BC, Thermopylae, Locris, Greece. Was a Spartan king whose stand against the invading Persian army at the pass of Thermopylae in central Greece is one of the enduring tales of Greek heroism, invoked throughout Western history as the epitome of bravery exhibited against overwhelming odds. A member of the Aegeid house, Leonidas succeeded his half-brother, Cleomenes I, as king, probably in 490. He was married to Cleomenes' daughter, Gorgo, and may have supported Cleomenes' aggressions against other Greek cities. In 480, Leonidas commanded the small Greek force that resisted the advance through Thermopylae of the vast army of the Persian king Xerxes. For 2 days, Leonidas withstood Persian attacks. He then ordered most of his troops to retreat, and he and his 300-member royal guard fought to the last man. This episode made a deep impression on the Greek imagination and gave rise to the legend that Spartans never surrendered. Xerxes Lensul, born c. 519 BCE, died 465, Persepolis, Iran, was a Persian king, 486-465 BCE, the son and successor of Darius I. He is best known for his massive invasion of Greece from across the Hellespont, 480 BCE, a campaign marked by the battles of Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea. His ultimate defeat spelled the beginning of the decline of the Achaemenid Empire. Xerxes was the son of Darius and Atossa, daughter of Cyrus. He was the first son born to Darius after his accession to the throne. Xerxes was designated heir apparent by his father in preference to his elder brother Artabazanes. A bas-relief on the southern portico of a courtyard in the treasury of Persepolis, as well as the bas-reliefs on the east door of the Tripylon, an ornamental stairway, depict him as the heir apparent, standing behind his father, who is seated on the throne. When his father died, in 486 BCE, Xerxes was about 35 years old and had already governed Babylonia for a dozen years. One of his first concerns upon his accession was to pacify Egypt, where a usurper had been governing for 2 years, but he was forced to use much stronger methods than had Darius. In 484 BCE, he ravaged the Delta and chastised the Egyptians. Xerxes then learned of the revolt of Babylon, where 2 nationalist pretenders had appeared in swift succession. The second, Shamash-Araba, was conquered by Xerxes' son-in-law, and violent repression ensued. Babylon's fortresses were torn down, its temples pillaged, and the statue of Marduk destroyed. This latter act had great political significance. Xerxes was no longer able to take the hand of, receive the patronage of, the Babylonian god, whereas Darius had treated Egypt and Babylonia as kingdoms personally united to the Achaemenid Empire, though administered as satrapies. Xerxes acted with a new intransigence. Having rejected the fiction of personal union, he then abandoned the titles of King of Babylonia and King of Egypt, making himself simply King of the Persians and the Medes. It was probably the revolt of Babylon, although some authors say it was troubles in Bactria, to which Xerxes alluded in an inscription that proclaimed, Xerxes thus declared himself the adversary of the Devas, the ancient pre-Zoroastrian gods, and doubtlessly identified the Babylonian gods with these fallen gods of the Aryan religion. The questions arise of whether the destruction of Marduk's statue should be linked with this text proclaiming the destruction of the Deva sanctuaries, of whether Xerxes was a more zealous supporter of Zoroastrianism than was his father, and indeed of whether he himself was a Zoroastrian. The problem of the relationship between the Achaemenid religion and Zoroastrianism is a difficult one, and some scholars, such as Monsieur Moll, have even thought that this is an improper posing of the question, that there were, rather, 3 different states of religion: a religion of strict observance, a royal religion as attested by the Achaemenid inscriptions, and the popular religion as described by the Greek historian Herodotus. With the tranquility of the empire reestablished, Xerxes would willingly have devoted himself to peaceful activities. But many of those around him were pressing for the renewal of hostilities. His cousin and brother-in-law Mardonius, supported by a strong party of exiled Greeks, incited him to take revenge for the affront that Darius had suffered at the hands of the Greeks at Marathon, 490 BCE. The impressionable Xerxes gave way to pressure from his entourage and threw himself into patient diplomatic and military preparations for war, which required 3 years to complete, 484–481 BCE. Herodotus notes that never before had such an effort been undertaken. Troops were levied in all the satrapies, and a navy, intended to be the army's supply line, was gathered. The care lavished on this enterprise shows that the king did not regard it as a minor operation. There has been much later speculation on the real causes for the expedition. They could not have been economic, because Greece was not important then. Perhaps it was only the manifestation of a royal absolutism. Xerxes, whose character was later distorted in Greek legend, was neither foolish nor overly optimistic. Although sensible and intelligent, he was nevertheless, according to Geos. Glots. At the head of his armies, he left Sardis for the Hellespont and had 2 boat bridges placed across the strait. A storm destroyed them, and Xerxes had the sea whipped as punishment. With the bridges remade, for 7 days he oversaw the crossing of the army, 5 million men according to Herodotus and 360,000 by modern estimate, supported by 700 to 800 ships. Their passage was facilitated by a massive engineering works. A channel was dug across the Isthmus of Actium so that the peaks of Mount Athos might be avoided. Nevertheless, the army's size was of no help, partly because of misinformation about the enemy terrain and partly because of the appearance of a national feeling. In Greece, after a few successes, for example, Thermopylae, mid-August 480 BCE, Xerxes occupied Attica and pillaged Athens on September 21st. But on September 29th, at Salamis, a naval battle that he had initiated turned into a defeat. Without a fleet to take supplies to the army, he had to retreat. He crossed over into Asia, leaving Mardonius in Thessaly. During an indecisive battle near Plataea on August 27th, 479 BCE, Mardonius was killed, and his death obliged the army of occupation to withdraw. Hostilities continued for 13 years, but thenceforth Xerxes involved himself only slightly.